All right, welcome Akshay. Really great to see you again, my friend. It's been a
You
minute,
too,
and
brother. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
yeah, absolutely. So, just so our audience knows, I met you, I believe, through John Berghoff, through like a mastermind a few
Yeah,
years ago, and heard your story and was just really inspired by you and followed your journey, followed you on Instagram, followed you losing fingers, all these crazy things you're doing, and I think in a lot of ways my life's path of facing fears has led me to you, and really
mm,
seeing you take it to the ninth degree, the highest level in many ways.
mm.
So it's really just really an honor to have you on today. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'd love to start with some of your story and anywhere you want to go. I know you have quite an impressive story, but I'd love to touch upon your background and even touch upon some of these darker moments for you that really led you on this path and to creating this whole platform you have and your book and all of that stuff. So where would you like to begin? We can start there.
Sure. Yeah, just background as far as what led me to the work I do today, the person I am today, and the ethos behind everything I do. When I was born in India, lived in India, Singapore, moved to Austin, Texas at the age of 13. Very quickly after moving here, got very heavily into drugs, into alcohol. I used to cut myself, burn myself, still have these scars on my arm. Very self destructive, lost two friends to addiction, was going down that path myself until one day when I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. And that movie was the trigger that changed my life. That movie planted the seed that got me off drugs and almost overnight off drugs and decided to join the Marines. And I wanted to, because it was just watching that movie and watching these men sacrificing their lives for another human being, the courage, the compassion, it made me question the worthless, selfish existence I was living at the time. And that's why I wanted to do something valuable with this life that I'd been gifted. And so I enlisted in the Marines. It took me about a year and a half to get into the Marines because I have a blood disorder that two doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. And so I had to fight my way in to get medical waivers for that. But the Marines is where I learned the beauty of suffering, the beauty of going to war with yourself, the beauty of adversity. Because in the Marines you suffer. Marine Corps boot camp was hard. Marine Corps training was hard, and I learned like the very ethos of who I am today. Not only the ability to transcend suffering, but living for something bigger than yourself. In the Marines, nobody gives a shit about your well-being. What matters is the men and the mission, and that's more important than your personal feelings that day. And when you live in an institution like that, in a world like that, in a reality like that, it's so beautiful. It's so profound. And of course, there's days when you hate it because there's days when you don't want to go on a mission because you're tired, but you go anyway because you have to. And that planted the seed. So after joining the Marines, I got big into all kinds of outdoor sports. I used to be terrified of everything, scared of heights. So I went rock climbing, mountain climbing, skydiving, bungee jumping. Scared of tight spaces. So I went scuba diving, cave diving, ice diving, caving, all kinds of stuff. Like nature became my playground until I was deployed to Iraq in 2007 as an infantry marine, where one of my jobs out there was to walk in front of our vehicle convoys looking for bombs before they could be used to blow up me and my fellow Marines. So dangerous job, but I had learned to embrace fear a good bit at this point already. And then when I came back from the war, I struggled with PTSD, drinking heavily, point of like drinking a bottle of vodka a day for a long time, depression, until one morning after 5 days of binge drinking, I was on the verge of suicide. And then that began my rise out of the abyss, like delving into neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, doing the inner work to face my own demons, to transcend them, and ultimately now finding my salvation in adventure, entrepreneurship, but specifically more pushing the boundaries and exploring the edges in these various playgrounds I play on, from mountains to polar ice caps to underwater caves.
Wow. Okay, that is a hell of
Been
an opening. Yeah.
been a good journey and very blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to come into a little bit more of, your experience with weir addiction. And it seems like the part of your life where you were at the darkest moments, that you were able to come out of that rather quickly. Am I right about that? I'm
I
kind of
would
want to hear
say
more about that part.
Yeah, I would say with the drugs for sure. I got out of drugs very quickly, relatively easily. With alcohol it was much harder. I broke my sobriety a ton of times. God, I couldn't even tell you a number how often I broke my sobriety. Even after I went through a fairly challenging divorce a few years, 4 or 5 years ago, broke my sobriety then. And so it that was a lot harder to break the alcohol pattern was
Mm.
significantly harder than drugs for me. Not to say again that's universal, but that was at least my experience.
Yeah, and I'm curious too. Like when I think I don't remember if this is in your book or a podcast I was listening to, but you talked about your seeking approval, almost like approval addiction growing up. And I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you think that plays a role in today with what you're doing and in the sense of, being out there and being out in the world and taking all these risks? Is there any part of that you think is also being relieved by what you're being today, or is that something you think you've kind of worked through, that need for approval?
I definitely don't do what I do now for approval. Many people disapprove of it. I've been called stupid, crazy, out of my mind. I get that shit all the time, especially after getting frostbite in Antarctica, losing two fingers. The amount of people are like, Why would you go back? What's wrong with you? You're stupid. Now, of course, there is a degree of approval I do get from this because this is what invites. I get invited to speaking events. I get a lot of praise and recognition as well. It's certainly not why I'm doing it, but I'd also be lying if I said it doesn't feel good when I get it. It certainly does, and I'm self-aware enough to know that. And I love speaking. I love the feeling of being on stage and being able to share all that. I enjoy it. It fuels me in a good way, but that's also like ego is not a bad thing. Ego is useful if you learn how to consciously engage it. You just have to be aware of it, and when it's sending you everything, like any emotion, any experience, anything can be disempowering or empowering. It can drive you higher or drive you lower, right? Including ego. Ego can be negative, it can be positive. So in that sense, I'm aware when it's playing its role, but why I do what I do now is not for that. I've done enough now to, even the other day, somebody told me at a speaking event, he was like, dude, you've done more than enough to warrant like your speaking to the, you have more than enough credibility in this realm already. And you don't need to do this. And I was like, I know I don't, and he's like, I know you like are not doing it for that. I do it now for the spiritual journey that I find on it. I do it because every big goal I believe should be two motivations, selfish and selfless. Everything, like it's important to have both. Either you can't, you really, it's not healthy, it's not valuable to have just one, right? So selfishly, I get a lot from these journeys, of course. Like it's a spiritual journey for me. It's tapping into transcendence, into enlightenment, to awakening aspects of my own soul that I've never awakened before. And selflessly, to go out onto the edge and bring the wisdom back from these playgrounds, from this. I mean, because I get to go so far out onto the edge in the extreme environments I play in, right? I mean, not just like in Antarctica, I've also been to war. I've worked in post-conflict zones. I've worked with survivors of sex trafficking, former child soldiers, people in poverty. I've volunteered in leper colonies. I've gone through the darkness within, right? PTSD, depression, addiction, all of this. I've confronted death plenty of times. I've been on the verge of death myself plenty of times. And this allows me to access elements now in the human soul that are so rarely accessed, especially now when I'm planning to go 110 days completely alone in Antarctica. The depth of solitude and struggle and suffering and isolation I'll experience out there will be profoundly beautiful and challenging, but in that silence, in that stillness, you start to hear. And you can call it what you want. The universe, your subconscious, God is the term I use, whatever you want to call it. Hearing that voice of God, I'm privileged to be a messenger for the wisdom that is granted to me by the edge, the wisdom that you can only get when you're so far out on the edge, And so my responsibility in this life is to bring that wisdom back to help others who are battling their own polar storms. Everybody's suffering. Everybody's battling something in life, right? But I get to go places that many don't, and as a result, I get to unearth new treasures. Like the greater the dragon, the greater the treasure on the other side of it. And I get to battle some pretty fucking intense dragons. And so
Yeah.
I get to unearth some pretty beautiful treasures as a result.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love how you use the word dragon too, because that's actually a term that has come up this year for me with some of these
Mm,
battles that I've been facing, and I've been calling them dragons. And
mm.
it's really interesting you use that term. I want to bring it back for a second because I know you're going to be doing this 110-day journey in Antarctica. We're going to get into that. But I'm curious, like when you say soul, like what is the soul to you? Because it sounds like on these adventures, you're tapping into this place of almost, like you said, transcendence or flow or pure consciousness. So can you maybe touch upon that a little bit more?
Yeah, great question. I still don't know how to, because I've thought about it. It's rarely asked, so I love that you asked it. But I don't know how to fully answer that question of what is the soul. I don't personally believe in a afterlife or a previous life. So, it's not, to me, it's like, it's the thing in the human spirit that transcends consciousness. You go through these moments where you're like, you know, if you think of like, okay, what is the how would you distinguish mind and spirit or mind and soul? Like the mind is my intellect, it's the thought, right? Like when I'm typing something, I'm using creative. But sometimes the soul is that thing that transcends all of that. It's like I'm in the depths of hardship, I'm struggle, and something allows me to keep moving forward in the face of all that. You know, it's like when I go out there, I'm opening, like it's not just accessing my own soul, you're accessing wisdom of the collective human experience, the human consciousness. And I find, and it's very visceral, I've experienced this. It's not just abstract concepts I'm talking about. From spending 10 days in darkness, from being in Antarctica before, you find something within, some door within to move through immense amounts of hardship, immense amounts of isolation, of struggle, of suffering. And that spirit it lives within all of us. You know, you see it. We see human beings do the most incredible things a person can do. You know, and that soul to me is the ability to achieve what is often like, as a good example of this is, have you seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge?
No.
It's a great movie, true story about this Medal of Honor recipient in World War II, Desmond Doss. He single-handedly saved 75 people off a cliff. Like he pulled people sometimes as far as a football field. And what he did was impossible. Like skinny dude pulling 75 people off a cliff, it was impossible. But he did it, you know, and he did it. And what is that? To me, that's where you transcend the mind and the spirit, and you're accessing that. You transcend the mind and you access that power of the spirit, power of the soul, to go deeper into places that you can't, like it's beyond what the physical. We've all heard the stories of a woman lifting a car to save her baby, right? Like, and that's impossible for a person to do that. But why does that happen? It happens because that, to me, is like tapping into the human soul, tapping into God, tapping into the spirit.
Yeah, that's beautiful and very relatable. And I think like what you're tapping into too, when you say the collective, is like maybe like Carl Jung when he talked about the collective unconscious, like
Yeah.
tapping into that. And it's really curious. I'm really curious because it's like for me, I'm so curious to dive into like the root of why you do this. And I feel like I'm starting to get there with this soul conversation. Because there's like an ecstasy and a bliss that's experienced, and maybe even messages. Have you ever had a book or a download or something come to you in these spaces that you've or have now created into reality?
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's what, like I was saying, the silence you start to hear. And I call them spiritual downloads that I get. Like when I was in the Arctic, I was just in the Arctic a few weeks before this conversation. And I was out there for about 19, 20 days on solo expeditions. And I remember one day I was skiing. I had just finished. It was like we got hammered. I got hammered by 2 days of brutal polar storm. So the snow was very soft. And I was dragging this heavy sled up the soft snow. And as I was skiing in the silence, I started saying whispering to myself, "Thank you, God, for these perfect conditions." Now, if the snow was harder, it would have been a lot easier to ski, significantly easier to drag that heavy sled. But the thing is, everything is perfect in its isness because it cannot be anything other than what it is. And that literally came to me. I was like, everything is perfect in its isness, for it cannot be anything other than what it is. You know, and it's easy to hear those words and like, all right, I get what he's saying, but it's a different thing to viscerally experience it. Why I play out on the edges is it moves knowledge, it moves an insight from a conceptual thought, from a cognitive understanding to a visceral knowing. That's when it gets embodied into you. It shifts your very being. Like when I speak, when I talk, the person I am, I can maybe let's say I had heard somebody else, not me, say these very things. All right, okay, I get it. The wisdom makes sense, the knowledge makes sense, but I don't. It shifts my being because it's not conceptual anymore. It's a visceral being. Like even for example, in the darkness. I mean, when I came out of the darkness, right, the first time I've done 2 darkness retreats, 7 days and then 10 days. And I came out of the darkness, and just for, I think but like you can't see your hand in front of you in this darkness. It's 24/7, complete darkness, pitch black for the whole time, right? Came out, and the way the world looked in those few moments, I was moved to tears coming down my eyes, and I remember thinking this deep sense of gratitude for all the pain and hardship I've ever experienced in life, because in a very visceral way, I started to recognize that you cannot really know the light unless you've first been in the dark.
Yeah.
I could not have seen the world look that way for those few moments had I not just spent 7 days and then another 10, like later on 10 days in darkness, So it shifts the very fiber of your being, and that's one spiritual download that I had, Another one on the same Arctic trip, it hit me that when I was skiing, like every day I wake up, that version of me in the morning is dead and gone. That version of me, it was Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, who said, "No man ever sets foot in the same river twice, because it is not the same river, and he is not the same man," right? And I heard that quote before, and I was like, I kind of get what he's saying, but now it's like, holy shit, Now I get it. Now it's a knowing. Now it's not just a conceptual thought. Like this version of me that even was woke up this morning, that version of me will never exist again. Whatever memory I have of it, even memories are fragmented lies. I won't go too, I'm happy to go into it if you want me to, but in Fearvana I talk about the neuroscience of memories and how they're not, like they're basically malleable memories, you know? So whatever memory I have of this version of me in the morning, it's not inherently quote unquote true because it's a malleable. Memories are constructs. So that version of me will never exist again, ever. And so every day we are literally going through a death and a rebirth, right? Like I'm born again and I'm dying again. And when you think about that, like the point of this is not to say live every day like it's your last. I think that's sometimes silly because then I wouldn't do the ridiculously hard things I do to prepare for my expeditions. Why would I go tire dragging 110 degrees if it's my last day, right? That shit sucks. It's more about living every day as if it's your entire life. Living every day as if it's your entire life. That's the thing. And that hit me when I was out there. And then it's again, now it's a knowing. It's not just a statement, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's going from a belief. You might have a belief your whole life of something, and then you actually have the knowing when you have the experience,
Exactly.
and that changes your whole reality. And that has
Absolutely.
certainly happened to me and happened to you. And, for me, just to be honest, and I know a lot of people are not into this, and it's totally fine and not part of people's journeys, but it was a calling to me after doing just like you. When I was reading your book, I'm like, this guy does a lot of research. So I did
Yeah.
the same thing before I ever decided to try plant medicines. And for me, I had a visceral experience that was my whole life since I was a child. Like my dad left when I was really young, 3 years old, never came back. So there was this father wound of this, there wasn't a replacement dad that came either. So it was just kind of like, bam, okay. And I caused this at some level, but I did start to develop some type of belief in something greater than myself. And that kind of kept me from exiting the planet, intentionally exiting. It was like, okay, this is helping me. And I held this belief and I held it for others. It was so strong. But in the last, I would say few months, I've had an actual knowing experience through some of these medicines. And, it transformed everything for me to be able to tune into that. But I love what you say about, every day is a new you. It's just like the cells in your body. They're regenerating every day. I don't think people realize what's going on just in your body. Your body and your cells are just regenerating. And I think every year, your body like regenerates all your cells. And so I think this is just a fact of life, but it's something we don't always think about. And I just love it because a lot of people we're talking to on this episode are people who are stuck. They literally are stuck in places of the deepest depression, anxiety, PTSD, trauma, and they don't wake up and have these conversations with themselves. Or so maybe we can talk more about these memories and that they're malleable. Maybe we can get into that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, so when the way a memory works, when we think of a memory, we think of it almost as I'm accessing, like let's say a movie, like I'm putting on a movie screen, a video of this memory of my birthday last year, as an example, right? But that's not how it works. Every time you access a memory, you're actually accessing the last time you accessed that memory. Meaning every time you open the door to X memory, the content of it, the neuronal structure of it changes based on the present experience of who you are and how you're feeling and what's happening in your brain as you access that memory. So what this does essentially is that you can actually change the relationship to a memory, because, and this is why sometimes like therapy can be very, or not, I'm not demonizing therapy, but some modalities of it, some methods of it can be very flawed, because if every time you're accessing a memory of, let's say, losing my friend in war from a very disempowered present state, you're only reinforcing that memory. Because again, when you access a memory, you're not accessing that memory. You're opening the last time you access that memory. And neuroscience has actually shown they can implant fake memories in people. They did a study on 9/11 where they asked people right after 9/11 where you were, and they asked them a bunch of questions. They asked them 5 years later, and very often, not just small things, but big things about their memory changed, literally about where they were when 9/11 happened. And this is not like I'm making this up. They believed it from the fiber of their being, right? So when you think about this, all the memories are malleable, and every time we access it, we can change it. So the way to manipulate this is like, and I actually was doing this in the Arctic, is recognizing like, okay, as you and me are sitting here, for example, every moment your mind is creating a memory. So how do I know when I walk over to a door? I don't have to think about how do I open that door. I just know there's a handle here, what to do. But if I'd never seen this before, I wouldn't know what to do there, right? Because my brain has formed a memory. And this is a simple example, but it's doing it all the time. That this is how this thing called a door handle works, right? So if I'm out in when I was out in the Arctic, I was aware that there's going to be a future version of Akshay that is going to think back about this memory, and how I think about this memory will shape how I interact with when I go to Antarctica. It'll shape how I go out when I drag tires, right? So being aware of how future version of me is going to think back on this past moment, in the present moment, I'm shifting my relationship to this experience by injecting it with, call it like empowering emotions, by injecting it with a smile, as something simple as that. Even every day in the expedition in the Arctic, when I had hard days, and I would change the memory of that day and think, oh, like at the end of every night, I would think of what is awesome about this day. How does it feel good? Why do I love this life out here? And reinforcing and bombarding that. Because every time you access a memory, it's changing the memory, right? So the next day I think about it, it's reinforcing it. It's reinforcing it. It's reinforcing it. Now, while there is still, of course, nerves about going to Antarctica, and there should be nerves, I'm genuinely excited about experiencing that depths of solitude. Because I was very consciously manipulating the memory of future Akshay while I was presently experiencing it. And you can also do this to the past. You can also do this about changing past memories. And this doesn't happen overnight, but the more you start to embody the truth of the reality that all memories are an illusion, you can start releasing your attachment to them as real. And I'll give you another example of how I was doing this. Like, let's say simple example, right? And I literally was having this dialogue with myself. I was saying to myself, what did you eat yesterday for dinner? I was like, all right, I had a steak. And I would be like, how do you know you had a steak? And I'd be like, all right, well, I mean, I know, I remember. I'm like, yeah, but you also know that memories are lies. So do you really know that? And I'd be like, and I'm literally having this dialogue to myself, as schizophrenic as it sounds. But I'm having this dialogue, right? And I would say, I can see the plate there, I can see the steak there, but I'd be like, yeah, but you don't really know that if that was yesterday, it could have been 2 days ago. It could have been who knows what, because you know memories are lie. And the whole point of this dialogue eventually is to get to the point where, which I would, if I cannot say with 100% certainty I had that steak again, I just have to create enough of a room of doubt. Now I know it's all an illusion. Boom. Now that I'm accepting that how I engage with reality is an all illusion, I can create my own illusion. And like we even had this philosophical conversation, right? The ultimate existential question: who am I? Who are you? To me, I wouldn't say there's a right answer, but to me, the best answer to that question is I am the creator of my own illusion. Everything about how I choose to engage with reality is an illusion. From the simplest way, when I see a white wall, how do I know that's white? How do I know that's a wall? Because I have been taught from a young age that color equates to the word white. That thing equates to the word wall. So I see it through a construct, through a lens that has been taught to me that this thing is that construct. And it's very hard. The goal is not to like remove all constructs. You're going to engage with that, but when you recognize it as a construct, you can see it as an illusion. And by recognizing the way I engage with reality as an illusion, I can create whatever freaking illusion I want. So I alter the past, and it doesn't mean I recognize that I lost a friend, but I alter the way I approach that relationship to the past. I alter how I make it mean. I alter my emotions to it. I alter the value to it. And all of that to find a way that serves the mission, serves me. As another example, like today, when I was in Iraq, my vehicle drove over an active bomb. It didn't explode. My friends drove over an active bomb. It exploded. He died. I was born to great parents with a better life than most people on earth. People are born into hell on earth. As I said, I've worked in these post-conflict zones. I've seen this hell. And as a result, simply by being born where I was born, I was blessed with 1,000,000 times more opportunities than most people on earth. I believe that I owe a debt for this life. I'm not saying this is a healthy way to think, because many people have said it's not, and I don't care. It works for me. And I'm not saying everybody should think this way. You got to find what works for you. The point is, I'm the creator of my own illusion. I believe I owe a debt for this life, and I pay off this debt by doing what I do. And that way of thinking has fucking changed the way I live my life. It makes my life better. I'm not miserable. I live with a very high intensity of life, and including playfulness. Like, I'm very, very playful, but God, I can go intense when I need to, when I want to. And it's big part of that is because I owe a debt for this life, and I pay off that debt by playing on the edges and bringing the wisdom back from the edge.
Wow. Beautiful. And I also want to just, where is like living in the now moment, exist? Because it sounds like I've heard it say in spiritual traditions that the now moment is the eternal realm. It's heaven on earth is the now moment. So how does that land with you with what you're saying is it's like right now is the most important time there is right here because the rest is an illusion, right? Like the Mayans would say. So how does that land for you about the now moment and living in the present? How does that play a role in your
Yeah,
consciousness on a
beautiful
daily
question.
basis?
I think it's important to recognize the duality of now and not now. So not now is the past and future, right? And there's value in both. I think sometimes when we put too much emphasis on we always have to be in the now, like there's value in having a future goal. It helps change how I engage with reality. And at the same time, my past, even if it is a malleable construct, it shapes who I am today, right? We're always creating memories, and those memories shape how I engage with reality. So it's important to be the goal, as far as the way I see it, is to be conscious of how you dance in that duality of now and not now. You know, which time perspective do I need to be in? So when I have a goal that says, all right, let me think about what this is going to entail. What do I need to do to ski across Antarctica? X, Y, Z, blah blah blah. A map out. This is the future pacing, right? Now, all right, got it. Now that I'm training for it, when I go out dragging tires, I will be here. I will be now. I will be present. Simple way to bring presence is just to focus on one of the five senses. You know, it's a super simple way to bring your consciousness back into the now. But the point is to say that that duality, it can coexist. It's not just always about being in the now. There's a value in stepping into the past to engage how your relationship to that past. There's a value in stepping into the future, right? But you're using all these time perspectives to ultimately build a more blissful reality in the now and to create a more blissful reality as you move through life, to feel more fulfilled, to feel more alive, to have that meaning of why you are here, you know. But that those time realms, it's important to be able to consciously dance in them.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I want to know, what do you do on a daily basis for your own self-regulation? So to have this consciousness that you have, besides taking, risks and putting yourself and smashing your fears, like what are some of the things you do for self-regulation? Maybe it's mindfulness, or maybe it's cold therapy. What are the things that you do on a daily basis that help you practice this?
I do breath work. I do meditation. I was doing a lot of cold therapy since I just lost two fingers. I'm taking a little bit of break, and then to even though
Yeah.
like even if I don't put my hands in it, I'm just I'll probably get back into it now though. It's fine now, but I took a little bit of break. But I was doing a lot of the cold tubs. So yeah, big part of it, other than my training, is other than like tire dragging training, strength training, all that, is just doing a lot of like recovery work. I have compression boots right here. I do breath work. I do meditations. Do stillness, things like that. Yeah, putting the right nutrition in the body, all of that. And then
What
those are like the day to day. And then on the extreme circumstances, every once in a while I'll go out to like darkness retreats or those kind of things. But this is on the sort of day to day in the daily life.
Yeah, so I know you work with individuals one on one. You help people through whatever they're going through in their journeys. Like, let's say if you were working with someone who came to you that was struggling with, they're successful, they're an entrepreneur, right? They're out there, they're doing big things, they're making nine figures or whatever, but they're struggling with addiction. They're struggling with numbing out. Where would you start with them? Just curious from your kind of lens, of where would you start with someone like that to get on the path where they could have more conscious choice in their life?
You got to for that, and I would delve into what is their constructs of reality, what has happened. Because I mean, if somebody's escaping through addiction, and I get it, something has happened that's like driving. The drinking or whatever the thing is the symptom, right? So what is that thing? Like mine was very war related, dealing with guilt, dealing with my stuff. Everybody's got their own stuff. So we'd have to like delve into that. I mean, if somebody's open, the first thing I would do is like go into a darkness retreat. That shit is like chunking years of therapy in and into one sitting. It is the most effective thing you can, in my opinion, one of the most effective things you can do to open doors that haven't been opened before. Because even if you come to me or any therapist, any coach, and coaching will say like it's not about imposing my constructs onto them. It's about asking questions to help them unearth their own stuff. And I get it. I've been trained as a life coach. That's what it is. But I don't care what it is. You're always going to be bringing your constructs into the relationship with another person. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a human thing. That's just what happens, right? So I would dig enough to understand what's actually happening there. What are their constructs of reality? How do they think about the world? How do they believe about the world? Why are they numbing? What's the thing that they numb? And then here's the key thing though, is that you have to do the hard work to get to the other side of it. The biggest problem I see when it comes to addiction or PTSD is looking for the easiest, quickest way out without going through the work, without doing the hard thing. Like as an example, I did an interview. I was very blessed with Dr. Drew once, and somebody called into the interview and was like, she had been through the Boston bombing and was struggling with PTSD around it, and we were helping her going through different things. And at one point in the conversation, she says, it came up, and I was like, the next time you feel hypervigilant with a loud noise, I just want you to kind of pause and sit with it and be with it and notice it. And she goes, that's really hard. And I go, I know that's really hard. And it's not her fault. Like, I don't fault her for this, but everybody wants to get to the other side of that. Like, I want to feel good without doing the hard thing. If that mindset alone is the biggest flaw, and you can come to me, you can come to anybody, it's gonna be fucking hard. You're gonna have to do hard work. You're gonna have to face the demons that you're running away from. So the biggest thing is we would first understand what those demons are. What's your flavor of trauma? We've all have our own stuff that we've dealt with. Getting into their understanding of reality, and then doing the stillness to start bringing that to the surface, and then starting to create. And as you're starting to bring that stuff to the surface, you start creating a space between that stuff and you as you are not your thoughts, you're not your feelings, you're not your experiences. You're the thinker of your thoughts, the feeler of your feelings, and the experiencer of your experiences. So we got to train to build that space between what is and who you are outside of what is. So that comes from self-awareness practices like meditation, being stillness, channeling it to something beautiful, channeling it to something worthy, leveraging your demons as beautiful. Your demons are not your enemy either. Like when that survivor's guilt I felt from the war, for a long time, I had a picture of my friend up on my wall, and it said, this should have been you. Earn this life. My guilt was my ally. Guilt is not a bad emotion. Fear is not a bad emotion. There are no bad emotions. All emotions are just emotions, and any emotion can be valuable when you consciously access it. And I can't tell you how many therapists have told me there's something wrong with the way I think. There's, stuff like that because of this idea that I have a debt that I owe a debt for this life. People who love me have told me that's unhealthy, and I don't care. And that's the whole thing is if that doesn't work for you, cool. This works for me. And it's like I've channeled my darkness around this debt, these feelings of guilt for my life, and I've made it work. It doesn't mean I'm miserable. I'm like incredibly happy. I fucking love life. That's why I'm scared of death. There was a time in my life that I wasn't scared of death. So we would find your paradigms of reality to create like your constructs and engaging both the darkness and the light in this, and then I would start building, what is your mission? What's your philosophy statement? Like, what's the North Star? I even know in my mind, like, what are the words I want on my tombstone? And for me, it's he brought light into darkness. But when you have that, now you have a North Star, right? Am I doing that? Am I living that way? I have a philosophy statement of the ethos in which I operate, in which my life. My philosophy statement is the path to inner peace is the pursuit of a worthy inner war. And that's my philosophy statement. So that drives me, So getting clarity around all those things, like your philosophy, your North Star, your words on your tombstone, your mission, these things will then give you purpose to channel your demons and channel your darkness, channel even your light into.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me too, like with my background and the way I've, was kind of born into addiction and the life that I'm here for. Like when I really step into the love and light and all this like empath stuff, it kind of messes me up. Like if I really stay in that for too long, it's like, this is not me. I need to get into the darkness a little bit to bring myself into resilience, to drive this is really, and at some points it was rigid. I know this, there was rigidity, there was routines, but there's also, a beauty to it all, which is what I feel you're describing. Yeah. And even in your book, there's a line in there that it says, if you don't choose a worthy struggle, a struggle will choose you. And it's like, I mean, that's just wrap up the episode right there. Cause it's, to me, that there is a lot of wisdom in that.
And Carl Jung says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. One of my really good friends, who's a peak performance psychologist at the highest levels, I won't say his name, but he works with the best of the best in the world. He says, never trust somebody who's all light. And I've experienced this because people who pretend to be all light in the woo-woo world and all that, and if you spend enough time with them, you'll see the shadow self rising. And if you're not aware, if you haven't done the work to the shadow self, it will control you, and you're not even aware of it. And so when he said that, I was like, holy shit, man, that's a powerful line. And I've seen people like that, man. I've seen, like, when I volunteered in Liberia and doing post-conflict work out there, you'll see people who they weren't there to help people. They were there to get a token picture of a black baby in Africa. And it could not have been more evident. And they weren't aware of it, but it was evident, because they were like, oh, light, I'm an empath, this. And I'm not knocking all that, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking. I know people who are genuine empaths and all that, but you have to do the shadow work. If you don't, it will control you without your awareness. Because as Carl Jung also says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say too, like what I've noticed in myself, I was a chronic people pleaser for like
Mm-hmm.
39 years. And
Mm.
obviously behind that is layers of fear and then layers of
Yeah.
some type of injury, some type
Yeah.
of post-traumatic injury, if we're going to call it that. But what I noticed by people pleasing is I realized what's called spiritual bypassing. I never had really understood that concept until I started to dive into the dark night of the soul stuff, which really
Mm.
started in 2021 for me, really in depth, when my business felt like a scam. Like, what am I doing? What is this business? What is my North Star? And I started to have like a breakdown that I haven't felt in 15, 16 years. But the beauty of that, it showed me this spiritual bypassing, even using meditation as a way to spiritual bypass my emotions and feelings like you're describing, that can actually be beautiful, even guilt.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful twist that we're talking about in this.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. I mean, I think that's is finding value in the even the challenging emotions. I don't use that word negative intentionally, but the ones that we quote unquote call negative. That's if you do that, man, you're able to turn your suffering into bliss. That's the most important skill to master in life, because then whether you're seeking a challenge or whether life punches you in the face, which it will, you can find beauty in the whole adventure of it, in all of it.
Yeah, I recently heard you on a podcast that I secretly enjoyed, just the conversation of what was being said, and I knew based on your book and knowing you a little bit that it was not aligned with what your beliefs are, which is great. I love hearing perspectives, and that's what even this show's about: is bringing in both sides of what people believe addiction is and how it originates, and
Yeah,
if it
yeah.
even is a thing. All of it. I love to hear all of it, but I loved how. This particular episode, there was this talk about free will, and there's this conversation about free will, and I know your take on free will is something different. Like, there's the myth of free will, and so, but the person, I don't think he read your book, but he was talking about free will and all these things, and I'm going, oh, this is going to be good. And I was actually really honestly going to judge you harshly. I'm just kidding. But I was like, how is he going to respond? Is he going to people
I don't
please or
remember this.
stay true
Okay.
to himself?
Mm-hmm.
So you did. And so can you talk a little bit about the myth of free will?
Sure. So the notion, like, we don't control most of what happens in our brain. So, for example, if somebody comes into this room right now with a gun, I'm going to respond with fear. I'm not choosing fear. It happens as a response to external stimuli. Even how I go about engaging with the world, it's shaped by, it's shaped by everything that's made me who I am today, from my genetics to the past reality, to my upbringing. I mean, most of what we know about religion, about politics, about life, it's been shaped by our parents, by schools, by the world around us. We didn't choose it. That shaped us into who we are, right? And people think now I have agency over it, but to what degree do you really? Was that just ingrained into you, right? So most of how we interact with life, most of our thoughts, most of our feelings are not choices that we have made. They have been ingrained into us without our conscious awareness. So the myth of free will is that, like, we don't control most of what happens in our brain. But, and here's the thing, and this is where the philosophical discussion, like Sam Harris has a great book called Free Will. In it, he kind of argues that really it doesn't exist. Like, even for example, let's say you and me are sitting here having this conversation, and there's a glass of water next to you, and I'm going to tell you, don't pick up that glass of water, and you're like, no, I'm not going to. Like, fuck you, I have free will, I'm not picking up that glass of water, right? In the simple example there, but even that choice, if you rejecting my command of picking up a glass of water, you can say I'm choosing free will, but that's not free will, because everything about you has been cultivated to become the kind of person who would reject that command, right? So he kind of argues to that. In my opinion, that's not valuable. Even if that might be somehow true, if we could actually measure it, and they actually have measured free will. Like, they've been shown brain scans that people can put in a brain scan, and they'll be able to find parts of the subconscious brain where they can register that they were going to do something through brain patterns before the deed was actually done, before they lifted the actual glass of water or whatever, through brain scans, which sort of neurologically validates this myth of free will. But here's how I believe that free will is most valuable to approach, regardless of what's quote unquote true. And it's best summarized by a wiser man than myself, P.D. Uspensky. in this book, The Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution. He says, man is a machine, but a very peculiar machine. He is a machine that when recognizing he is a machine, can cease to be a machine. So what that means is we are a machine in that our reality is shaped beyond our agency, right? Beyond our awareness, beyond our control. But simply by once accepting that, now I can regain my agency. Now I have free will. Now I can choose what to do with that. And even if, like, by some, somebody saying that, yeah, that choice of me not picking up the water is shaped by me, I would rather believe that I have that free will, and because it serves me better in how I engage with my life, right? So the point is, when you actually accept the limitations of free will, it's what helps you regain true free will. Because now you can accept all these things. They're not really real. My construct of identity, my beliefs around religion, my beliefs about politics, my beliefs about these are things that were just taught to me. I'm not like, I don't have agency of that. But okay, got it. This was ingrained into me. Now I have agency over what do I do with it. Do I want to believe it? Do I want to live my life this way? What would be another way of thinking? I mean, one huge skill in today's reality is, let's look at an opposing side of an argument. Maybe the way we think is wrong. The willingness to be wrong. Nobody fucking does that today. We'll only find information that validates our own belief systems, confirmation bias. And don't get me started on the fact that, social media and everything reinforces that the way the algorithms are just fueling that kind of confirmation bias. We won't go down that rabbit hole. But the point is to say, that we're happy to if we want to. But the point is to say that, like, I can look for opposing arguments to question myself, and then when I actually do that and then make a conscious choice, now I'm choosing from a higher place because I've looked at both sides of the argument consciously, rationally, with awareness, with the and I literally do that. Like, even when I do it in Antarctica, I'll be like, what's all the reasons I shouldn't do this? And if I can find all the reasons I shouldn't do this and I still want to do it anyway, that says something.
Yeah, you had something spark in me that I don't even know how I'm going to word it because this never came to me before. But I think where this is going for me with the myth of free will is, and if you don't want to answer this, or if it's just not in alignment, whatever, let me know. But when I think of, obviously this show was started for many reasons of my evolution of what I believe addiction is, and what trauma is, and really getting this message out there to talk to all these fascinating opinions of addiction. So when you say the myth of free will, it makes me think of addiction and the choice or not choice of getting a prostitute, sex addiction, or using alcohol, and then we can talk about emotional addictions too, like approval addiction or procrastination addiction and all these things. Where do you think this idea of the myth of free will comes into play with picking up a drink or the disease model of addiction?
Yeah, great question, man. I think that, I could, if somebody were to measure my brain scans, I've never done it, and I've heard this, people who do extreme sports, people who struggle with addiction, they have sort of low dopamine receptors, right? Like their dopamine receptors are somewhat flawed or messed up, that has them seek out dopamine in these ways, whether it be through alcohol or even like the sports that I pursue. I've read studies that say that. So let's say I was born with these dopamine receptors this way, right? That I'm more prone to it. The agency still has to be mine. This is where I think if we fall into the victim mindset, oh, woe is me, it's not my fault, I'm a victim, this is a disease, I'm a slave to it, you're setting yourself up for failure. I reject the hypothesis, which in addiction that sometimes is said that, it's not on me. It's like surrender. Look, I'm not saying don't value God in this relationship. That's at least in my paradigm, that's a somewhat different. I have my own relationship to God for sure, in life and how I navigate it. But agency is mine. And so no matter what, like even as example, I have a blood disorder that transports 25% less oxygen through my body. Two doctors told me Marine Corps boot camp would kill me. I lost fingers to frostbite. The doctor who surgically removed my finger said, without a doubt, your thalassemia, your blood disorder was contributed to that because less oxygen flowing through your extremities, especially in the cold. It doesn't one bit stop me from doing this shit. I'm going back to Antarctica, So I can accept that there's elements beyond my control. Let's say that let's say childhood traumas. Let's say something fucked up happened to you when you were a child, something horrific. You couldn't control that, obviously. That's not on you. And it has shaped your brain a certain way as a result. Got it. But if you are going to hold on to the paradigm that you are a slave and a victim to that, that's not helpful. But here's the thing, man. And this is going to sound like it's going to sound messed up potentially, but it is very, probably already has to some degree, but it's very alluring to stay a victim. It's very alluring. And you will see people say this: you don't understand me. You don't get this. This happened to me. You don't get me. You can hold on to that all you want. And dude, I've lost the people closest to me from this way of thinking. So this is not like just saying it. I've lost people close to me. I've been in a victim myself. Like, woe is me. Like, you know, shit. You know, my life is fucking hard, dude. Everybody's fucking life is hard. Like, you know, the point is like regain agency. This shit happened, and God knows it. Show compassion for yourself. I will show compassion to you. Like if somebody came to me again working with this, obviously there's compassion. Like there's a love. You approach it with love. But at some point, it's like you have to then seize responsibility for your reality. I'm sorry this thing happened to you. God knows I'm sorry. That's horrific. It's terrible. It should not happen to anybody. Life is, who knows, you know, what life, like why things like that happen in the world. Like like I said, I've worked with former child soldiers. Dude, I worked with one guy who saw his parents being hacked by a machete when he was a kid. He saw people being raped to death in front of him. Like the most horrific things a human being could experience in the depths of human evil. And God knows that's like terrible. Why that happens, I don't know. You know, I don't have an answer to that. And it's horrific, it's awful, it's evil. And it'll undoubtedly shape his perspective on reality. But at some point, if you don't like your reality, he's out of it now, you have to regain agency. And that's where it steps back in. It's on me to now shape this. I couldn't control that shit happening. And it's fucked up that it happened. But what am I going to do about it now? I couldn't control my friend dying in war, but I could control how I approach it. I could choose to view that guilt as something beautiful. I could choose to view that I owe a debt for this life. And that debt that I owe helps me live a better life. You know, so tapping into, coming back to what we said earlier, tapping into the darkness of it and using it. But you have to regain agency.
Yeah, it made me think of the second dart syndrome in your book, right? You talk about the second dart. And if anyone doesn't know what that means, maybe you can just quickly run in, you know, because this ties in perfectly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful concept that I was blessed to learn. Buddha said we're all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. The first dart is the one we don't control. So I'm going, let's say, like when I give an example of this, I don't control that these awful things happen to me, let me give you a simple example. When I took this person rock climbing, she was very scared on this scramble, this friend of mine, and she was very scared. It was like a scramble, and she felt fear. That was the first dart. We finished the climb, got to the top, came back down to the car, and she was beating herself up. Like, what's wrong with me? You didn't feel fear. She was talking to me like, well, you know, you weren't scared. Why was I scared? I'm weak, all this kind of stuff. The only reason I didn't feel fear is because I had done a lot of climbing on much harder routes that the scramble wasn't perceived by my brain as a risk. So it didn't respond with fear. Remember, we don't control the emotion that first shows up. So the first dart is the point of power, that the thing we don't control. The second dart is the point of power. I may not control that my dopamine receptors are messed up or whatever. But what I can control is that agency, is the second dart. And don't get caught up in like, what's the first dart? Is it the rock wall? Is it the fear? Or is it the thought after that? The point of power is as soon as I consciously step in, as soon as I choose to regain agency over this reality, that's the second dart. Because if you don't consciously step in, you're going to spiral into all these downward spiral of these second darts, right? You're going to, that self-dialogue, oh, woe is me, bad things happen to me, God hates me, the world sucks, all that dialogue. But that's what I call second dart syndrome. But as soon as you stop it, as soon as you step in, got it. I'm going to regain agency over this conversation. I'm not scared because I wasn't scared because I was weak. I was scared because my brain didn't have references. And in fact, it took more courage on her part to make that climb. It took no courage on my part because I didn't feel fear. To me, it was easy because I had done a lot of stuff, so it took no courage. It took more courage on her part. Now, the question is, how do you see it? That's the second dart. She could choose to view herself as weak for feeling fear, or choose to view herself as courageous for feeling the fear and stepping in and making the climb anyway, right? So that's the second dart, is stepping in and regaining agency over your reality. But you have to let go of the victim mentality, which, like I said, it's hard to do because it's very alluring. And I see this shit all the time. I've done a lot of, like, when I'm helping people, I'll do a lot of research in forums and Facebook groups and stuff about, like, depression, PTSD. And I hate to say it, but, like, so much of the dialogue in there reinforces a victim mentality. So much of the dialogue, the general conversation around it is, woe is me. Like even depression, people say, oh, you don't get it. This is not sadness. And look, I fucking get it. I've been through it. I've been through the deepest, darkest. Dude, I was downing a bottle of vodka a day. Like if you don't think that's the darkest shit, I would be throwing up in the toilet. As soon as I'm done throwing up, I'd pick up a bottle and drink again. Yeah. For days on end. And so I get it. But if you keep holding on to the reality that, oh no, my depression is different, this is not just sadness, you can stay a victim and hold on to it. Or you can regain agency. and take like small fucking steps. People will be like, oh, I can't get out of bed in depression. I guarantee fucking to you, if a gun was pointed to your head, you could get out of bed. You know what I mean? So you can one step, and then two. But you got to start small when you're in that pain, when you're in that depths of hell. I didn't get to who I am overnight after downing 5 bottles of vodka in 5 days, right? This did not happen overnight. As I mentioned, I broke my sobriety a shitload of times. But you do the work, and you keep fucking rising, and you keep rising.
So, like, maybe just stepping into your current reality right now, like, what is something that you feel like you need to surrender and shed out of your life right now? What's coming up for you right now?
Dude, I love your questions, man. Great questions. There's a lot of constructs I have that aren't, a lot of ways I approach the world that aren't healthy in the normal world, but are valuable for what I'm about to do in Antarctica. So, like, even for example, right now, the other day, I went to a crowded restaurant and I got anxious in a crowded restaurant. I'm fully aware of it. I'm fully aware that I'm like orienting myself to, but I don't need to fix it right now. I don't need to do anything about it right now because I'm going to 110 days of complete isolation. So even like the way, I've just recently met somebody. We went on a couple of dates. And funny thing is, I was more scared going on that date than I am about like going 110 days across Antarctica. So I get terrified of that stuff. But it was, and the cool thing is we could talk openly about it. And I was sharing, and it's like, everything about my reality has to be earned, everything, and there's value in that. But sometimes that can be unhealthy. Like even if I'm going, and like we were talking about it with her. It's like even if I'm anything, it's like, why do I deserve you? If I have a good evening with you, I have to earn this. And there's value in that to a certain degree, but I recognize that it can be unhealthy. But right now, I'm not too worried about addressing it because in Antarctica, that's a fucking beautiful. When I'm going to be suffering immensely out there, and so recognizing that like all this shit's going to be earned, I'm going to pay off my debt. Because people have asked me after Antarctica, do you think you would have paid off your debt? And I don't know because how can I possibly answer that question until I experience it? But I do think I'm going to go through so much hardship and suffering out there beyond anything I've ever experienced that I think there'll be a transition period where I'll be a fucking mess when I come back, mentally, physically, and stuff. But after that, it will change my relationship to certain things, and I'll do a lot of course correcting. Like I will course correct my my certain ways of thinking that aren't very conducive, including like I consciously. My friend was trying to help me work through this. My struggle with crowds. I had worked through it after the war, because after the war I struggled with crowds. I've almost like consciously reintegrated it. I mean, dude, just last week I was consciously delving into trauma, like going into trauma to induce post-traumatic growth. That's not a health, like every night I was crying myself to sleep and activating flashbacks and nightmares in my, like I was having flashbacks and nightmares, consciously choosing to engage that, like consciously creating circumstances that would have it show up in my subconscious. That's not a fucking healthy way to live on a day-to-day basis, believe it or not. But is there value going there? For sure. So point is to say, like, you orient your reality for what's come. Like in my case, everything is oriented towards this 110-day journey of Antarctica. And when I come back, I'll course correct for the new reality.
Yeah, and I mean, but how are we going to help your dating life, man? If you're going to be trying to date up into this Antarctica, how are we gonna make that happen?
So I wasn't like trying to date because it was like just not worth it right now. I live a fucking insane life. I mean, we've met somebody, gone on 3 dates, and now we're gonna be meeting again, and she's somehow cool with my psychotic lifestyle and nature. So, see, the thing is, when you live this way, the volume of your life is dialed at a very high intensity. And that intensity, it doesn't just mean like intense as in like eye of the tiger intense. It also means like everything you experience is more intense. Like just yesterday, I was sitting out looking at the night sky and just feeling it so beautifully, because in Antarctica, I don't get to see a night sky. It's 24 hours daylight, so I don't get sunsets, I don't get stars, I don't get sunrises. And these are some of my favorite times of day. And the only reason I could look at the night sky the way I saw it was because I know it's going to be gone. Every hot shower I take, I'm like, this is fucking awesome, because I know it's all going to be gone, So it amplifies the intensity, and that intensity is a bit much for somebody, and I get it. Like I've had a relationship end because I was too intense. But for some people, it's a draw, So she's got to be a little psycho in your own way, and I use that word positively. I'm like, you got to be a little crazy to even put up with this. So
I can relate, brother. I can relate. 100%. Oh man. Well, I'd love to ask you, like, I mean, I know this Antarctic crossing that's coming, but like, maybe it's not that, but maybe it is. So, what is like your highest vision, your highest intention to bring to reality right now? What are you looking forward to manifesting the most right now?
I think bringing, I mean, like ultimately the mission is to bring light into darkness, right? To help people find light in the darkest corners of their own soul. Everybody's battling hell, man. Just yesterday, no, on Wednesday, I'd come back from the gym and I stopped to get a smoothie, and this homeless gentleman saw me and asked me for a ride somewhere. And something about that particular, I had to come back, finish preparing for a talk, and part of me was like, full transparency was like, fuck, man, I got things to do. I don't have time for this right now. But I was like, no, man, this is like, I'm gonna help. And I took him like, it was out of my way. I took him to the ride, and he was chatting with me, and he was like, he was drunk, and he was sharing about how his kid's getting bullied, his kid's autistic, and he was like, I need to stop drinking. And just the pain in his eyes, man. Nobody's getting drunk in the middle of the day that like that, unless you're struggling with some deep dark demon, you know. And people are in a lot of fucking pain. And so I guess it's just bringing, like, look, you got to go through the pain to find the other side of it, but bringing at least more tools, more resources, more light into that, even if it's just a glimmer, to help people. Because sometimes you're in so much darkness, you don't even see the possibility of a light on the other side of it. God knows I get it. But if you can offer a glimmer, it can become something to cling to, some hope to keep clawing your way out of the abyss. And so while I'm training for Antarctica, to keep sharing the wisdom I gain, like, like having these conversations. I speak at a bunch of events. I'm speaking at an event in Colorado next week, and I speak and just share these lessons that I've been blessed to receive from the voyages on the edge that I get to go to.
Well, it's been a great honor to have you on the show, and we're not ending yet, but I would love to just let our audience know how can they work with you, reach out to you, learn more about this great, what is it, the Great Soul Crossing?
Great soul
Yeah,
crossing. Yeah. So
that
it's
sounds
on.
cool.
We have a crowdfunding page right now. Any support there would be greatly well received. We're trying to raise a massive amount of money to fund this expedition. I'm invested all my money, time, body, energy, lost fingers for this expedition. So I'm all in. But at this point now, definitely looking for some outside support to help. So greatsoulcrossing.com. It's great, SOUL crossing.com. And then you can find me at Instagram at Fearvana, Fearvana.
Hmm.
Fearvana is where I share the journey, share the lessons, share the wisdom I get to receive. And then the book, Fearvana, as you mentioned, it's on Amazon in paperback and Audible. All the profits go to charity as well. So we support a lot of great causes through the book as well.
Yeah, Fearvana is a great book. So everyone listening, get that book. You know, if you're if you've ever followed me at all and smash your comfort zone and all these things, I mean, this is like, I don't want to say the Bible, but this is definitely a really smart book. It has plenty of science and plenty of experiences, and the story is amazing of Akshay. So grab the book. And
Thank you.
I know on the crowdsourcing page, there's some giveaways too. So
Yes,
if
there is. Yeah.
someone was to donate, there's some giveaways there.
We share, and like some of them, like it's the different tiers. I share all the things I've learned over the years. I have a program called the Fear Chasers Alliance. It's one of the giveaways on the crowdfunding. Right now, anybody who calls me for speaking events, I'm like, don't pay me, just donate, just fund the crossing. I don't care. Like that's the whole thing right now is making this happen. So yeah, I give away different things of trainings on navigating the pain cave. Like how do I build this character? How did I overcome trauma? I have series of trainings inside that program on trauma, because I also think our collective approach to trauma is deeply flawed, and it only reinforces it. So I have a bunch of trainings that I've done in there on trauma as well.
Well, I'm excited to dive into deeper into these trainings and get to know you even more, my brother. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been
Thank you for having me.
amazing. So
Really beautiful
thank you.
conversation. Appreciate you, brother.
Absolutely.